Hi, my name is Adrian, and today I would like to show you my favorite Magic the Gathering deck I currently own in 2025, the commander of which is Teysa Karlov. This is a white and black, or Orzhov deck. She is a 2/4 human advisor, and her abilities read: if a creature dying causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. Creature tokens you control have vigilance and lifelink. Next is the mana base. I currently have 16 planes, my favorite of which, for my video viewers, is this Kamigawa Plains. This is version 293 if you're looking on Architect. For swamps, I have 14 swamps in this deck, my favorite of which is this Snow-Covered Swamp in foil, version number 261. My non-basic lands are as follows. Firstly, in Evolving Wilds, which is a non-basic land that reads: tap, sacrifice this land, search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. The next is a non-basic called Isolated Chapel. Isolated Chapel reads: Isolated Chapel enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a plains or a swamp. And you may tap it to add white or black to your mana pool. The flavor text reads: not every church is a place of faith. Quite ominous, if you ask me. The next is called Caves of Koilos, which reads: tap to add one colorless to your mana pool, and tap to add white or black to your mana pool. Caves of Koilos deals 1 damage to you. The next and final of the non-basic lands is called Tainted Field. Tainted Field reads: tap to add 1 colorless, and tap, add 1 white or 1 black. Activate only if you control a swamp. Next, we'll talk about the artifacts. The first being a Soul Ring. Soul Ring costs 1 colorless and reads: tap to add 2 colorless. The next is called Orzhov Signet, which reads: pay 1 colorless and tap to add white black. The next is an Arcane Signet, which costs 2 colorless and reads: tap to add 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity. The next is a Talisman of Hierarchy, which costs 2 colorless and reads: tap to add 1 colorless, or tap to add white or black. Talisman of Hierarchy deals 1 damage to you. The next is called Oketra's Monument. It costs 3 colorless and reads: white creature spells you cast costs 1 less to cast. Whenever you cast a creature spell, create a 1/1 white warrior creature token with vigilance. The flavor text reads: the worthy shall respect the worthy. In the afterlife, all will stand united. The next is a Jet Medallion, which costs 2 colorless and reads, black spells you cast cost 1 colorless less to cast. Coming close to the end is a Skull Clamp. Skull Clamp costs 1 colorless and reads, equipped creature gets +1/-1. Whenever equipped creature dies, draw 2 cards and equip 1 colorless. The last of the artifacts is an Ashnod's Altar, which reads, sacrifice a creature to add 2 colorless. Next up, we have the enchantments. The first of which is Intangible Virtue. It costs 1 colorless and 1 white and reads, creature tokens you control get +1/+1 and have vigilance. The flavor text reads, find glory not in blood, nor dragons felled, but in kindness given, oaths upheld. The next is called Grievous Wound, which costs 3 colorless and black. It's an aura that reads, enchant player. Enchanted player can't gain life. Whenever enchanted player is dealt damage, they lose half their life rounded up. The next is called Grave Pact. It reads, whenever a creature you control dies, each other player sacrifices a creature. The flavor text reads, denied the peace of the blessed sleep, geists lash out at the living, and the cycle of anger and unrest continues unbroken. The next is called Angelic Exaltation. And it reads, whenever a creature you control attacks alone, it gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of creatures you control. The flavor text reads, if we cannot have peace, we will have justice. Aurelia. The next is a room, the left side of which reads Dazzling Theater, which costs 3 colorless and white. Dazzling Theater reads, creature spells you cast have Convoke. The right side is called Prop Room, which costs 2 colorless and 1 white, and reads, untap each creature you control during each other player's untap step. Incredibly strong, if you ask me. The next is called Black Market. It costs 3 colorless, black, and reads, whenever a creature dies, put a charge counter on Black Market. At the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, add black for each charge counter on Black Market. The flavor text reads, there's very little that merchants won't buy, and even less that wastelanders won't sell. The next is called Nurgle's Rot, which costs 1 black. It's an aura that reads, enchant creature an opponent controls. When enchanted creature dies, return Nurgle's Rot to its owner's hand, and you create a 1/3 black demon creature token named Plague Bearer of Nurgle. The flavor reads, each Plague Bearer is formed from the blighted soul of a mortal slain by Nurgle's Rot. Love me some Warhammer 40k. The next is called Bastion of Remembrance, which costs 2 colorless and 1 black, and reads, when Bastion of Remembrance enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. Whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life, and you gain 1 life. The flavor reads, lives taken are lives not easily forgotten. The next is called Muster the Departed, which costs 2 colorless and 1 white, and reads, when Muster the Departed enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying. Morbid. At the beginning of your end step, if a creature died this turn, populate. The next is called Divine Visitation. It costs 3 colorless and 2 white, and reads, if 1 or more creature tokens would be created under your control, that many 4/4 white angel creature tokens with flying and vigilance are created instead. The flavor reads, the angels appreciated the offer, but politely declined to eat any birdseed. The next is called Phyrexian Arena. It costs 1 colorless and 2 black, and reads, at the beginning of your upkeep, you draw a card and you lose 1 life. The flavor reads, you will perish, but first you will entertain me. Shieldred, Praetor of New Phyrexia. The next is called Cathar's Call, which costs 2 colorless and 1 white. It's an aura that reads, enchant creature. Enchanted creature has vigilance and, at the beginning of your end step, create a 1/1 white human creature token. The flavor reads, some Cathars succumbed to despair at Avacyn's unmaking. The rest redoubled their efforts to carry out her work. The next is called Ghostly Prison, which costs 2 colorless and 1 white, and reads, creatures can't attack you unless their controller pays 2 colorless for each creature they control that's attacking you. The next is a room, the left side of which is called Funeral Room, which costs 2 colorless and 1 black, and reads, whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life, and you gain 1 life. The right side is called Awakening Hall, which costs 6 colorless and 2 black, and reads, when you unlock this door, return all creature cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. The next is called Darksteel Mutation, which costs 1 colorless and a white. It's an aura that reads, enchant creature. Enchanted creature is an insect artifact creature with base power and toughness 0/1 and has indestructible, and it loses all other abilities, card types, and creature types. The flavor reads, infinitely powerless. The last of the enchantments is called Felidar Retreat. It costs 3 colorless and 1 white, and reads, landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, choose 1. create a 2/2 white cat beast creature token. Or put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Those creatures gain vigilance until end of turn. Next are the creatures. The first of which, Rhea Evor, Bane of Bladehold. Rhea costs 2 colorless, a white, and a black. Rhea is a Phyrexian knight that reads, Battlecry. Whenever this creature attacks, each other attacking creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn. At the beginning of combat on your turn, the next time target creature would deal damage to one or more players this combat, prevent that damage. If damage is prevented this way, create that many 1/1 colorless Phyrexian Might artifact creature tokens with Toxic 1, and this creature can't block. The next is Toby, Beastie Befriender. Toby is a 1/1 human wizard that costs 2 colorless and 1 white, and reads, When Toby, Beastie Befriender, enters, create a 4/4 white beast creature token with, this creature can't attack or block alone. As long as you control 4 or more creature tokens you control have flying. The flavor reads, Sure, I'm pretty small, but Gribble isn't, so I don't get scared. The next is called Hanged Executioner. Hanged Executioner is a 1/1 spirit that costs 2 colorless and 1 white, and reads, Flying. When Hanged Executioner enters, create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying. For 3 colorless and 1 white, and exile Hanged Executioner, exile target creature. The next is called Marionette Apprentice. Marionette Apprentice is a 1/2 human artificer that costs 1 colorless and 1 black, and reads, Fabricate 1. When this creature enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on it, or create a 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature token. Whenever another creature or artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life. The flavor reads, Yes! I got its leg to twitch. The next is called Assault Intercessor. Assault Intercessor is a 3/2 Astartes warrior that costs 1 colorless, a white, and a black, and reads, First Strike, Menace. Chainsword. Whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, that player loses 2 life. The flavor reads, A foe without honor is a foe already beaten. The next is called Falkenrath Noble. Falkenrath Noble is a 2/2 vampire that costs 3 colorless and 1 black, and reads, Flying. Whenever Falkenrath Noble or another creature dies, target player loses 1 life, and you gain 1 life. The flavor reads, I often think on how excited they must feel to be chosen as my prey. The next is called Keeper of the Accord. Keeper of the Accord is a 3/4 human soldier that costs 3 colorless and 1 white, and reads, at the beginning of each opponent's end step, if that player controls more creatures than you, create a 1/1 white soldier creature token. At the beginning of each opponent's end step, if that player controls more lands than you, you may search your library for a basic Plains card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. The next is called Grim Haruspects. Grim Haruspects is a 3/2 human wizard that costs 2 colorless and 1 black, and reads, Morph Black. You may cast this card face down as a 2/2 creature for 3 colorless. Turn it face up any time for its morph cost. Whenever another non-token creature you control dies, draw a card. The flavor reads, we all want to know what's going on in someone else's head. I simply open it up and look. The next is called Morbid Opportunist. Morbid Opportunist is a 1/3 human rogue that costs 2 colorless and 1 black, and reads, whenever 1 or more other creatures die, draw a card. This ability triggers only once each turn. The flavor reads, on Innistrad, one person's windfall usually starts with another person lying face down in the mud. The next is called Zulaport Cutthroat. Zulaport Cutthroat is a 1/1 human rogue ally that costs 1 colorless and 1 black, and reads, whenever Zulaport Cutthroat or another creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. The flavor reads, Eldrazi, ha! Try walking through Zulaport at night with your pockets full. Now that's dangerous. Next is called Thalisse, Reverent Medium. Thalisse is a 3/4 human cleric that costs 3 colorless, a white, and a black, and reads, at the beginning of each end step, create X 1/1 white spirit creature tokens with flying, where X is the number of tokens you created this turn. The flavor reads, she hears every voice from the swirling, whispering mist and swears to tell their stories. The next is called Grand Abolisher. Grand Abolisher is a 2/2 human cleric that costs 2 white and reads, during your turn, your opponents can't cast spells or activate abilities of artifacts, creatures, or enchantments. The flavor reads, your superstitions and mumblings are useless chaff before my righteousness. The next is called Athreos, God of Passage. Athreos is a 5/4 god that costs 1 colorless, 1 white, and 1 black, and reads, Indestructible. As long as your devotion to white and black is less than 7, Athreos isn't a creature. Whenever another creature you own dies, return it to your hand unless target opponent pays 3 life. The next is called Resolute Reinforcements. Resolute Reinforcements is a 1/1 human soldier that costs 1 colorless and 1 white, and reads, Flash. When Resolute Reinforcements enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 white soldier creature token. The flavor reads, Morale rarely survives the sudden appearance of a squad of Cersei skirmishers at an army's flank. The next is Cathar Commando. Cathar Commando is a 3/1 human soldier that costs 1 colorless and 1 white, and reads, Flash. For 1 colorless and sacrifice Cathar Commando, destroy target artifact or enchantment. The flavor reads, Honorable tactics are for honorable foes. These werewolves are preying on innocent travelers. I'll stab them in the back while they sleep if I have to. Next is Yahenni, Undying Partisan. Yahenni is a 2/2 Etherborn vampire that costs 2 colorless and 1 black, and reads, Haste. Whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Yahenni, Undying Partisan. Sacrifice another creature. Yahenni gains indestructible until end of turn. The flavor reads, The time for subtlety is over, darling. Next is Elas Ilkor, Sadistic Pilgrim. Elas is a 2/2 Phyrexian Core Cleric that costs 1 white and 1 black, and reads, Death Touch. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life. Whenever another creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life. Next is Kumbal, Profiteering Mayor. Kumbal is a 2/4 human advisor that costs 1 colorless, 1 white, and 1 black, and reads, Whenever 1 or more tokens enter the battlefield under your opponent's control, for each of them, create a tapped token that's a copy of it. This ability triggers only once each turn. Whenever 1 or more tokens enter the battlefield under your control, each opponent loses 1 life, and you gain 1 life. The next is High Society Hunter. High Society Hunter is a 5/3 vampire noble that costs 3 colorless and 2 black, and reads, Flying. Whenever this creature attacks, you may sacrifice another creature. If you do, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. Whenever another non-token creature dies, draw a card. The flavor reads, You've been a marvelous servant. Consider this your final assignment. Next is Elenda, the Dusk Rose. Elenda is a 1/1 vampire knight that costs 2 colorless, a white, and a black, and reads, Lifelink. Whenever another creature dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Elenda, the Dusk Rose. When Elenda dies, create X 1/1 white vampire creature tokens with lifelink, where X is Elenda's power. Next is Boss's Chauffeur. Boss's Chauffeur is a 0/0 elf citizen that costs 4 colorless and 1 white, and reads, Boss's Chauffeur enters with a number of +1/+1 counters on it equal to 1 plus the number of other creatures you control. Alliance. Whenever another creature you control enters, put a +1/+1 counter on Boss's Chauffeur. When Boss's Chauffeur dies, create a 1/1 green and white citizen creature token for each +1/+1 counter on it. Next is Venom Crawler. Venom Crawler is a 2/2 demon that costs 3 colorless and 1 black, and reads, Lifelink. Whenever another creature dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Venom Crawler. Next is Vengeful Blood Witch. Vengeful Blood Witch is a 1/1 vampire warlock that costs 1 colorless and 1 black, and reads, Whenever this creature or another creature you control dies, target opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. The flavor reads, Using blood to shed more blood. Tell me that's not inspired. Next is Selfless Spirit. Selfless Spirit is a 2/1 spirit cleric that costs 1 colorless and 1 white, and reads, Flying. Sacrifice Selfless Spirit. Creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. The flavor reads, There is always more to give. Next is Blood Artist. Blood Artist is a 0/1 vampire that costs 1 colorless and 1 black, and reads, Whenever Blood Artist or another creature dies, target player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. The flavor reads, From the veins of a peasant to the sketchbook of a master. Next is Warren Warleader. Warren Warleader is a 4/4 rabbit knight that costs 2 colorless and 2 white, and reads, Offspring 2. You may pay an additional 2 colorless as you cast this spell. If you do, when this creature enters, create a 1/1 token copy of it. Whenever you attack, choose 1. Create a 1/1 white rabbit creature token that's tapped and attacking. Or, attacking creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. Next is Jacked Rabbit. Jacked Rabbit is a 1/2 rabbit warrior that costs X, 1 colorless, and a white, and reads, Ravenous. This creature enters with X +1/+1 counters on it. If X is 5 or more, draw a card when it enters. Whenever Jacked Rabbit attacks, create a number of 1/1 white rabbit creature tokens equal to Jacked Rabbit's power. The flavor reads, Squash. What it is and what it does. Next is Drivnod, Carnage Dominus. Drivnod is an 8/3 Phyrexian horror that costs 3 colorless and 2 black, and reads, if a creature dying causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. 2 Phyrexian, colorless. Exile 3 creature cards from your graveyard. Put an indestructible counter on Drivnod, Carnage Dominus. Black Phyrexian can be paid with either black or 2 life. The last of the creatures is Bartolomé del Presidio. Bartolomé is a 2/1 vampire knight that costs 1 white and 1 black, and reads, sacrifice another creature or artifact. Put a +1/+1 counter on Bartolomé del Presidio. Next are the sorceries. The first is Revival Revenge. Revival costs 2 hybrid Orzhov mana and reads, return target creature card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Revenge, on the right, costs 4 colorless and 1 white, 1 black, and reads, double your life total. Target opponent loses half their life, rounded up. Next is Blasphemous Edict. Blasphemous Edict costs 3 colorless and 2 black, and reads, you may pay 1 black rather than pay the spell's mana cost if there are 13 or more creatures on the battlefield. Each player sacrifices 13 creatures of their choice. The flavor reads, a demonic pact is all fun and games until the bill comes due. Liliana Vess. Next is Hop to It. Hop to It costs 2 colorless and 1 white, and reads, create 3 1/1 white rabbit creature tokens. The flavor reads, finding a hidden patch of glowberries is almost as joyful as eating them. Almost. Miss Bumbleflower. Next, and the last of the sorceries, is Spark Harvest. Spark Harvest costs 1 black and reads, as an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a creature or pay 3 colorless and 1 black. Destroy target creature or planeswalker. The flavor reads, with the harvest of Domri's Spark, the Elder spell began to fuel Bolas's ascension to godhood. Next are the instants, the first of which is Mortify. Mortify costs 1 colorless, 1 white, and 1 black, and reads, destroy target creature or enchantment. The flavor reads, you held fire in your hand, old man. It should have been destroyed. Altair ibn Lahad. Next is Secure the Wastes, which costs 1 white and X, and reads, create X 1/1 white warrior creature tokens. The flavor reads, Bashenga was the first Black Panther. Wise and fearless, he closed the great mound and formed a militia that would guard it against all intruders. Next is Dark Ritual, which costs 1 black and reads, add 3 black to your mana pool. The flavor reads, Eye of Twilight, give us sight. Take our offer, give us might. Make our power tears of night. Next is To Arms, which costs 1 colorless and 1 white, and reads, untap all creatures you control. Draw a card. The flavor reads, The call came, spellborn through mortar and stone to the ear of every soldier. The call came, and the advantage was ours. Lotus, Captain of the Watch. Next is Call the Coppercoats, which costs 2 colorless and 1 white, and reads, Strive. This spell costs 1 colorless and 1 white more to cast for each target beyond the first. Choose any number of target opponents. Create X 1/1 white human soldier creature tokens, where X is the number of creatures those opponents control. The flavor reads, When the alarm crystals flash, Draneth's finest answer the call. The last of the instants is Go for the Throat. Go for the Throat costs 1 colorless and 1 black, and reads, Destroy target non-artifact creature. The flavor reads, Pray that night is upon us, for if this twilight is the work of the Necrons, we are all dead men. Address by Lieutenant Krakos prior to the Blood Moon massacres. Last but not least are the Planeswalkers, the first of which is Elspeth, Sun's Champion. Elspeth starts with 4 loyalty counters and costs 4 colorless and 2 white. Elspeth's +1 ability reads, Create 3 1/1 white soldier creature tokens. Elspeth's -3 ability reads, Destroy all creatures with power 4 or greater. Elspeth's -7 ability reads, You get an emblem with creatures you control get +2/+2 and have flying. Next is Sorin, Grim Nemesis. Sorin starts with 6 loyalty counters and costs 4 colorless, a white, and a black. His +1 ability reads, Reveal the top card of your library and put that card into your hand. Each opponent loses life equal to its converted mana cost. Sorin's -X ability reads, Sorin, Grim Nemesis, deals X damage to target creature or planeswalker, and you gain X life. His -9 ability reads, Put a number of 1/1 black Vampire Knight creature tokens with lifelink onto the battlefield equal to the highest life total among all players. The final planeswalker is Liliana, Dreadhorde General. Liliana starts with 6 loyalty counters and costs 4 colorless and 2 black, and reads, whenever a creature you control dies, draw a card. Her +1 ability reads, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. Her -4 ability reads, each player sacrifices 2 creatures. And her -9 ability reads, each opponent chooses a permanent they control of each permanent type and sacrifices the rest. And that concludes Teysa Karlov, the Indomitable Human Bureaucracy. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next time.